Hello everybody, this is Karma Killed the Cat, and welcome to your second C++ tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll be going over variables, but before we get into that, some things I forgot in the last tutorial. After you finish the main function, just type out return 0 here, and also comments. If you just put 2 forward slashes on a line, you can type anything you want after those 2 forward slashes, and it will get ignored. So as you can see here, I just wrote what this line does, output text to the console. So now that we've gone over that, let's get into variables. So to declare a variable, see, we'll use comments here. You want to write the type of the variable, the name of the variable, then the equal sign, and then the value of the variable. So for those who don't know, a variable in programming is just a value that can change throughout your code. And there are several different types of variables. The first one is an int, or integer. So we'll just name this variable 1. And so I'm pointing at it, I'm an idiot. The int is the type name, var1 is the name, and then we'll do equals, and we'll do 10. So an int or integer is any whole number, so it cannot have a decimal place. It must be a whole number. The next type of value is a float or floating point. We'll call this var2 equals, we'll do 10.55. So if you couldn't figure it out, floating point variables are just numbers that do have decimal places. You don't have to put a decimal place, but you can. And if you're not putting a decimal place, you should just use an int. It uses less memory from the computer. The next type of variable is the char variable. We'll call this var3. And a char variable can store any single character. So pretty much anything on the keyboard. There are some symbols that you can't put in a char variable. The only one I can think of right now is backslash. That won't work. But this variable doesn't have much use, or at least you won't use it very much now. I think it has some uses in very advanced programming, but I've never used it. The next variable, this variable you will use a lot, the Boolean variable. The Boolean variable can store 2 values, either true or false. And this is a very useful variable. You won't see the use for it now, but you will see how it can be used very soon. Now the next type of variable is a string, and it's special because it's not really a variable, it's technically an object. But for this tutorial we're going to treat it as a variable, and then I think in the 4th tutorial I will go over the other uses for strings. But the first difference you can see when using the string variable is you actually have to include another file, the string file. And the second difference you'll see is that you have to use the standard : command, which means the string is part of the standard namespace. But after that, it's pretty much the same thing. You just do string var5, or whatever you want to call it, equals, and then in quotes. By the way, char variables have to be in apostrophes, which are called single quotes in programming. So for strings, you just type out whatever you want to be in the string. And a string is just a string of characters, so a word, a sentence, anything. And again, if you some symbols, just like in character variables, some symbols will make it act weird, but in the string tutorial, which I think will be tutorial 4, I'll go over how to use the backslash, but for now, just know that you can't put it in the string. And that's all the different types of variables. And if you want to output a variable to the console, you just do standard count, and then instead of putting what you want to be outputted in quotes, like we did in the last tutorial, you just put the name of the variable, and then again you do standard and line. So let's put all the variables onto the console. So I'll just copy this 5 times, and then we'll do 2 3, 4, and 5. And if you hover over the variable names, you can see, I'm pointing at it again, you can see it'll say int var1, float var2, char var3, bool var4, and then standard string var5. So if you ever want to know the value of a variable, just hover over it. And so let's run our program now. So you hit F7 again to compile it, and then Control F5 to run, and you'll see 10 for variable 1, 10.55 for variable 2, C for variable 3, and 0 for variable 4. If you try to output a Boolean variable to the screen, if it's false, it'll output 0, and if it's true, it'll output 1. There's really no reason besides this tutorial to ever output a Boolean variable to the screen. And then hello for the string, and then I just forgot to delete this. And now I'm going to go over variable modifiers. What variable modifiers do is they slightly change what type of value a variable can store. So the first one is const or constant. So let's make a new variable, constant var6, or no, we need constant int var6 equals 10. Now what the constant modifier does is it makes it so that after the variable is declared here, it can't be changed. So if we do var6 equals 6, that should give us an error. We might have here we go. var6 you cannot assign to a variable that is constant. It's saying that weirdly, but that basically just means you can't change the value of a constant variable. So these are useful for just any value you want to have that will never change throughout your program. The next variable modifiers can only be assigned to integer variables. The first one is long. So long int var7 equals, and what this does is it makes it so an integer variable can store a much higher value than if it was just a normal int. So we'll do 5 billion. I think that's 5 billion. Maybe miscounted. But the maximum number a normal integer can store is 4,200,000,000 something. I can't remember the exact number. But if you do need to know the exact number, you can just Google search it. The next modifier for integers is unsigned int var8. And what making an integer unsigned does is it makes it so that it cannot go any lower than 0. So if we do var8 minus equals, and that's the same as saying var8 equals var8 minus, we'll do 1, and you'll see what happens if we when we output all these variables, what that will say on the console. But unsigned variables can't go less than 0. So now modifiers for floating points. Double, and I think this is the only one, or it's the only one that I know of. So double var9 equals 10.55555. And notice that I didn't do double float. That's because I think it's Visual Studio that does this, but it treats doubles as another variable type instead of just a modifier. So if I try to do double float and then compile it, it'll say double followed by float is illegal. I'm not sure why. At least the way I learned C++ was that double was a variable modifier, not a separate variable type, but I could be wrong, but Visual Studio just treats it as a separate variable type. So just do double var9 equals, and then 10 point decimals. And what double does is it makes it so that floating point variables can store more decimal places, because normal floating points can only store, I think it's 3 or 4 decimal places. And I think that's all the variable modifiers that we're going to go over in this tutorial. There are more, or I think there's only one more. It's called static, but that's useless to us until we learn about functions and scope, which will be in the 5th or 6th tutorial. So I'll go over that then, but for now, let's just see what happens if we output the rest of these variables to the screen. var6, what did I do? var7, var8, and var9. 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we'll compile this. Shouldn't be any errors. Those warnings, I don't know what those mean. And then we'll run, and we see 10, 10.5, 5, C, 0, hello. That's all the same, and then 10 again for the constant var6, and var7 for some reason is a different value than I put in. Not sure why, but you won't often be using long ints, or at least you won't be using them this way. So don't worry about that. And then you see here 4,294,497,295. That's for variable 8, the unsigned integer that can't go below 0. It says that because once a variable reaches the lowest value and then goes one more down, it loops around back to the top value. And then the double var9, I guess I put one too many decimal places and it put a 6 there. If you put a value that's incompatible, slightly incompatible, like I did here with the 5 billion and 10.555555, it will act weird, so be careful with that. And so yeah, that's variables. I think that's all for this tutorial. So in the next tutorial, we'll be going over loops and if statements, and maybe switch statements, though I don't know. So see you in the next tutorial.